Hi there, thanks for joining me. In this video, we'll take a look at blending. There are a lot of different blenders to choose from under the blenders category. If you go to it in your brush selector here, and you can see you have a lot of choices. Each one of these brushes can be configured in different ways to get different results from the brush by using these different parameters up here. So, first thing we'll do is we'll just start with a blank canvas here. It doesn't really matter what size it is. And we'll put some color down on it. So let's choose a brush, and let's choose the chalk basic crayon. That's an easy brush to find. We'll use a red color here, and we'll just put down some red. And we'll go ahead and try blending it. So we'll go back to the blenders category, and let's choose Diffuse Blur for our first test here. Let's try blending with it. Now, depending on how hard you press down with this brush, you might get some different results. If I push down really light and zoom in here, you can see that pushing down really light just kind of blurs it a little bit and teases it up. But if I push down really hard, then it really diffuses these pixels and kind of scatters them and makes them look really grainy. So pushing down light blurs, pushing down really hard really blends it a lot. So you can see I can get some pretty cool results here when I vary the pressure. I've got a pretty good blend. Now I can add some color to that. Again, we can go back to that same brush we had. We can use the chalk and crayon basic crayons. And let's add some yellow to that. Now the way that these particular mediums blend together already kind of pre-blends them. So you can see we have some blending of color, but if we wanted to blend this more, we could go back to our Diffuse Blur brush and we could refine that. We can also kind of smudge the color around more by using another brush called Coarse Oily Blender, and that gives us some kind of different results here where we can really blend this color in some different ways that are more clumpy. We could go back to the Diffuse Blur and blend over that and get some different effects. Now, as I mentioned, some of these brushes have different parameters that change how the brush functions. So I'm going to put down a little bit of color here and go back to this Coarse Oily Blender. And the way this brush works is it works along with your paper texture here. If you can't find your papers palette, it's in the window menu under Paper Panels, Papers. And depending on which paper you have selected, you'll get some different results here. So I'm going to select small dots with these settings that I have here. I'll just crank them all the way to the right. I'm going to start blending, and you'll see that it's picking up this dots pattern here when I'm blending. If I set the dots smaller, I get some different results depending on how I change this paper setting here. It also changes, if I change this opacity and I crank this up to 44, it's going to pull out more paint and do different things. So you kind of want to play around with these settings to get the kind of blend that you want. It takes a little experimentation. I can't really tell you in any short amount of time how to set each of these brushes. You really just kind of have to play around with it and see. This is your diameter, this is your opacity, or how thick your blend is going to be. And then your grain is how much of your paper texture is going to be picked up. Jitter just scatters your brush. It makes, it kind of throws your brush off center when you paint. So you probably most of the time aren't going to want to use jitter unless you want some kind of special effect to happen there. There's another kind of interesting brush called Just Add Water, and that just kind of adds lighter and lighter color as you paint over a color. So it really makes it look kind of like it's running water. That's a really good blender if you're just working on one layer, but if you work on separate layers, there's kind of an issue where if you put down some color and then you try to blend it with this brush, the Just Add Water brush, it's going to add white to achieve that watery effect. It shouldn't be adding white. What it should be doing here is it should just be blending with the red and the yellow that's underneath. And it should look like this, but it doesn't, unfortunately. So if you're working with a really wacky color, like let's say this is not black and it's blue, you're either going to have to let it tint on a multiply layer or just accept that you're going to get some weird results when you try to blend. We'll take a look at the blur brush. The blur brush is good just if you just want to do a basic blur of something. Maybe you have something that's a little too sharp, like a tree limb in the foreground, and you just want to blur it a little bit. Blur brush is pretty good for that. Just kind of gives it a good Gaussian blur. So I like to use that to get some kind of focal effects. You can also get some interesting kind of psychedelic effects by using some of the distortion brushes like Turbulence and Hurricane. Let's try Hurricane, for instance, on this layer, and you can see it kind of twist the color up here to get some really cool effects. That's kind of a way of blending. You could also change your color to achieve some blending effects. Like let's say, for instance, we want to make a three-dimensional object here. I'll go ahead and just put in a spherical shape, and we'll turn on Preserve Transparency. I'm going to use the airbrush here and just manually airbrush in some blending. The airbrush kind of blends as you paint, so it saves you a little bit of time. If you need to go through and refine it, you can do that with the Diffuse Blur and blur it, blend it a little bit more. You can get some pretty cool results. If you want it to look chunkier, you can use the Coarse Oily Blender and kind of tap and smudge, and you can get a different kind of texture. Make it look more coarse if you want to. Next, we'll take a look at how blending works with the impasto brushes. Impasto is Corel Painter's way of trying to make your paint look like it is kind of sticking up off of the canvas three-dimensionally. It works pretty well. It looks pretty cool. It's pretty convincing. The only problem is if you go to blend it with one of the blenders, what's going to happen is you're only blending the color. You're not blending any of the white and the black that's being added to achieve this impasto effect. So in a way, this impasto is kind of completely separate of the color. So that might not necessarily be helpful for you. And I recommend if you're working with impasto, just to be aware of that and maybe try to add your impasto effect after you've already done all the blending and different things you wanted to. And you can watch one of my other videos on adding texture and things on separate layers. I'll put a link for that in this video. The last thing that I want to talk about for blending is a little anomaly that's called white fringe. I like to call it that. And it's something that happens in Painter. It doesn't happen in some of the other digital painting programs, so it's really just kind of a bug that's in Painter. And I'll show you how that works. I'm going to make a black background with a red circle on top of it on its own layer. And then I'm going to blend it a little bit. And what I expect is that when I blend, my circle's going to blend from red to black, so it's going to get darker as I blend it out. Let's see if that happens using the blender. So I'm blending, and I get this light gray stuff. What is this? This isn't how it should blend naturally. Why is this happening? Well, Corel Painter has some built-in function where it just kind of assumes you're always going to work on a white canvas, perhaps, and so in that case it's fine if your red blends to white, but I'm working on a black canvas, and so I don't want that to happen. So they recommend that you do a couple things. The first is turn on pick up underlying color. So let's turn that on and let's see if that does anything. Nope, doesn't do anything. Okay, let's try their other solution, and that is to use the gel cover blend mode. And there we go. The gel cover blend mode fixes it, and that's great. There's one issue though. I work in Photoshop, and gel cover is not compatible with Photoshop, so that makes it kind of a nuisance for me to use this blend mode, and I'll use it very rarely For the most part, I have ways to remedy this white fringe, but I recommend the best way to avoid it is just to not make it happen at all. So here's a few tips when you're blending. If we have our sphere here and maybe we add some different colors to it to make it kind of stand out more. Let's add some shading here real quick. Something a little bit darker. And we'll go through and we'll blend that with something kind of extreme like this brush. It's fine if you blend in the center of your layer, but as soon as you blend from the outside of your layer inwards, you're going to pull in white. See what I did there? If I paint from the inside out, totally fine. But if I paint from the outside in, I get white every time, and that's except for here for some reason, but that may be because I painted somewhere outside of the shape. But nevertheless, you're gonna more often than not, you're gonna get this white stuff that comes in when you start blending. And if I start on a fresh layer, I'll demonstrate that for you again. So we've got our layer. I'll fill it with blue this time, and let's do some blending. Outside of this layer, you can see it's pulling in this white. And again, if we change our blend mode to gel cover, that's supposed to fix the problem, but it doesn't. We could try some other blend modes, like if we're working on a white canvas, we have a little bit more of an option here. We can do some different things, like we can maybe try to set this blend mode to multiply, and maybe if it's set to multiply, it'll blend a little better and you won't get that white. You see it when it's set to normal, but you might not want the layer to work that way. So if you do get any of this white fringe, you can easily just paint it out again. Just select the color that you had originally and then just go through with preserve transparency turned on and paint it all out. And try to do all the manipulating and blending of your shape before you shade it. So like for instance here, I'm going to do some blending. I'm going to get some fringe. We'll see it happen here if we make it a normal blend mode. I get a little bit of fringe, so if that happens, once I'm done blending, turn on preserve transparency, use that same color and just go through and just paint in over that white. And then, once you're done blending and filling in that white area, then go in and shade it however you like. And I'll help you avoid that problem. That isn't going to be an issue working in Photoshop or some of the other digital painting programs. Again, it's just a bug in Painter, but it's got some workarounds, so it's not the end of the world, and Painter more than makes up for it in a lot of its other features. So that's blending in a nutshell. If you want to learn more about blending or my techniques for painting and blending, you can watch one of my landscape painting tutorial videos, and that'll give you an idea of how to put this into use doing a full painting. If you found this information helpful, take a quick second to like this video or share it on Facebook or YouTube, and that'll make it easier for other artists out there to find this information. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for my next video.